Hello, third grade, and welcome to Unit 3, Week 2. We're going to go over your vocabulary words first, as usual. Your first word is the word donated. So when you donate something, you're giving something to help out. You can donate your time by volunteering. You can donate money. You can donate food. You can donate books. So when you donate something, you're giving it to a person or a group to help them out. Your next word is the word nervous. So when you're nervous about something, you're anxious or you're worried. You may feel nervous before starting a test at school, or you may feel nervous before you go on stage to do a play for your class. Your next word is the word disappear. Now, when something disappears, you can't see it anymore. So think of like magic tricks, right? Where they make something disappear. Or if your friend is standing in front of you and you cover your eyes and they jump into the other room and you open your eyes, they've disappeared, right? You can't see them anymore. They're gone. Your fourth word is the word temporary. Something that is temporary is basically just a fancy way of saying it only lasted for a really short time. So you can say, I bumped my foot on the edge of the table and it hurt for a while, but the pain was temporary, right? It hurt for a little bit and then it went away. Or they were doing construction work outside my window and the noise was really loud, but it was temporary, right? They made a lot of noise for a short while, but then they stopped. Your next word is the word amazement. Amazement means great surprise or wonder, right? When you find something that's wonderful or you're very surprised by it, you have feelings of amazement. You can say, I stared with amazement at how huge the mountains were. Number 6 is the word refused. When you refuse something, you're saying no. You're not going to do it. You don't want it. So you can say, I refuse to join in the game at school, or my sister refused to eat her dinner. So refuse is just a big way or a big word to say that you're choosing not to do something. Your next word is the word bravery. Bravery is when you're showing courage when there's something dangerous. So you can say Lewis showed courage and bravery, or the campers showed a lot of bravery when they saw a bear near their tent, right? They made sure to be very careful. They didn't run off. They followed all the rules that they were supposed to follow. So when you're brave, it means it's a synonym for the word courageous, or someone who has a lot of courage. Your last vocabulary word is the word leader. So a leader is someone who is in charge or a guide for a group of people, right? They're the one that is responsible for that group. They help to guide them towards a certain direction or certain actions. They're also the one that's responsible for that group. So Martin Luther King Jr. was a great leader for people. There are also leaders in schools. There are leaders in your home. Your parents are the leaders of your home, right? They help to guide and direct everything. They take care of everything. Now let's take a look at our spelling words for this week. So we're working with more R-controlled vowels. Now remember, an R-controlled vowel is a vowel that has the letter R immediately after it, right? So it's vowel, then the letter R. And it makes a strong R sound when you hear it. It's not just like a R sound, like the word run, where it's kind of soft. An R-controlled vowel makes a strong R sound, so think of a pirate. Your words this week are the words sharp, yard, artist, carve, porch, storm, sport, story, chore, shore, soar, hoard, oars, pour, your, learn, word, turns, orchard, and ignore. Now let's get into our notes for this week. So we're learning about a new figure of speech, or a new kind of figurative language called idioms. Now idioms are a lot of fun because we find them not only in the English language, but they're found in a lot of other languages. So if your family comes from somewhere else, definitely ask them, or if they speak a different language, ask them if they have any idioms in their language, because those are a lot of fun to work with. Now, what an idiom is, it is a phrase that has a meaning that's different than the words in it. So it doesn't mean exactly what the words are saying. It has a different meaning. And I'm going to give you guys lots of examples. So if I say it's a piece of cake, if I say this test is going to be a piece of cake, I'm telling you that it's going to be really easy. So a lot of these you've seen before and you've heard before, and you may know the meanings of a lot of them. You just probably didn't know what they were called, and they're called idioms. Now, if you are driving someone up the wall, right, you're bothering them or you're irritating them, you're making them crazy. So kids will drive their parents up the wall all the time. Or students might drive their teacher up the wall, or your little brother or sister might drive you up the wall, which means they're bugging you. Another idiom that I listed over here is when you tell someone, give it a shot. When you say give it a shot, you're telling them to try something else, right? It may be something that they're anxious or worried about. They're not sure if they want to try it. You say, no, it's going to be fine. Go ahead and give it a shot. That means try doing it. Now, if we say every cloud has a silver lining, that usually means that when we're talking about clouds, they're referencing kind of like dark, stormy clouds. But they say that every cloud has a silver lining, which means that you can find something good even in something that's not good. Or if you're in a bad situation, there's always something good that comes out of it. Either you're learning something important or something good happens at the end of it. So that's what they mean by that phrase, every cloud has a silver lining. Now, if you ask me to do something and I say, oh my gosh, I'm so sorry, it slipped my mind. When I say slipped my mind, that means I forgot. I don't mean something actually slipped in my head. That didn't happen. But it means that I forgot whatever it was. If we say someone is in hot water, that means they are in trouble. So if I say, oh, my little sister is in hot water, she forgot to clean up her room this morning, that means she's in trouble. If I tell you something costs an arm and a leg, or something is a ripoff, that means I'm talking about something that's very expensive or it costs way too much, more than what it's worth. If someone gets cold feet about something, that means they're nervous about it, right? They're worried. So we were about to do our play in front of the class, but my friend got cold feet, right? That means my friend got nervous before going to do the play. Now, if you say find your feet, if you're telling someone, I know this is a new situation for you, or you're in a new school, but you're going to feel much better once you find your feet. So what does that mean? That means when you start to feel confident, that's when you start to get comfortable in a particular area or a particular situation. You start to feel better about it, and you're less worried and you're less anxious. Now, if I tell you that these cookies that you made are second to none, that means I'm telling you they're the best. That means they're not in second place anywhere. They're in first place. When we say second to none, that means they don't come in second to anything else. They're the best of the best. If someone has a change of heart, if I say, I decided that this test was going to be 20 questions, but then I felt like it was a little bit too long, so I had a change of heart. That means I changed my mind about it. If I tell you I live a long stretch away from my favorite ice cream shop, that means it's far away. I can say a long stretch when I'm talking about distance, or I can use the phrase a long stretch when I'm talking about time. That just means something that's far away. Now, if someone tells you to get your act together, right? You may be at home and mom or dad see that you're bouncing around the furniture when you're not supposed to be, and they tell you, you know what, you need to get your act together. That means they're asking you to behave properly or the right way. Another common one is the phrase out of the blue. So I was quietly reading my book, and then out of the blue, my little sister jumps in the room and shouted that there was a spider in her bedroom. So out of the blue means without warning, right? It's not something you expected. They surprised you with it. We're going to go through a few more. Some of these are in your book, some of them are not, but they're fun to work on and to know. Our next one is, if I say something is a gray area. That means it's not clear. I'm not sure about it. I haven't really decided about it. It's not clear. It's a gray area. So maybe we should do it, maybe we shouldn't. Maybe it's allowed or maybe it isn't. Now, if you go to your friend and you tell them, I have an important story to tell you, and they say, okay, I'm all ears. That doesn't mean they're covered in ears. It just means that you have their full attention. They're paying attention to you only. They're not doing anything else. If you and your friends see eye to eye on something, that means you agree on it. So maybe you see eye to eye on what you both think the best movie is or what the best book is. That means you agree on it. Now, my last one here is call it a day. And I put this at the end because it means usually when you call it a day, you're done for the day or you decide to stop or quit for now. So I'm going to call it a day with these idiom examples, and then we're going to go on to the next part of our language arts notes. All right, the next part we're talking about are present tense verbs. So when we're talking about tenses, the tense tells us when something is happening, the timing. So there's past tense that happened in the past a long time ago, something that's already finished. We have present tense that talks about something that's happening right now. And then we have future tense. That means it's something that's going to happen in the future, but it hasn't happened yet. So you may be talking about something that you're going to do tomorrow or next week. So that would be in the future. Now, our regular present tense verbs have an S or an ES at the end of them. And we're going to review the rules for that really quickly, but we did go over these in units 1 and 2. So I'm just going to go over them very briefly. So we add ES if the word ends with S, SH, CH, X, or Z. So our verbs that have an ES at the end of them end with one of those letters. So the mom kisses the baby's owie, the boy washes his dog, the girl catches butterflies in her net, the dad fixes the broken sink, and the bee buzzes around the flower. Now we add S only to the end of our verb when it ends with anything that's not one of those letters, if it ends with anything other than S, SH, CH, X, or Z, or if it ends with a vowel plus the letter Y, like play. When we make it present tense, we say plays. The boy plays in the playground. Now, sometimes we need to change that Y to an I. Again, this is a review. So if it ends with a consonant Y, then we change that Y to an I and we add ES to the end of it. So vowel Y just adds an S and nothing else. Consonant Y turns the Y into an I and then we add ES. So fly becomes flies, cry becomes cries, worry becomes worries. So consonant Y over here, it becomes IES. Over here, consonant Y in cries becomes IES. Fly, consonant Y becomes IES. All right, and the last part of our notes is something that you guys already do quite often, but it's a rule to help you remember in case you run into a sentence where you're not sure. So this is something usually when you hear it, you can tell that it sounds right or it doesn't sound right. But sometimes if you're not sure, this rule will help you figure out which one is right. Now, we're going to talk about subject-verb agreement. That means the number of subjects you have, if it's singular or plural, has to show that it matches with the way we write the verb. So if we're talking about a singular subject, one subject, you're just going to add S or ES to the verb. So Sarah walks or she walks, Amar draws or he draws, the baby watches or it watches. So singular subject, S or ES on the end of it. Plural subject, you don't add anything to it. They talk, we draw, people sing. So singular subject, S or ES, plural subject, nothing at all. Now, there is an exception to this rule, like many things in the English language. Unfortunately, we just need to remember the exception. Now, if the subject is I or you, we don't add anything. We treat it the same way we treat a plural subject. So I write or you read. We don't say I writes or you reads. So singular subject, S or ES, plural subject or I or you, nothing at all. So that's all you need to know for our language arts and grammar notes for this week. I'm going to go ahead and jump into our story. Please do come back and revisit these notes and revisit the video as needed, because a lot of these things are things that are going to be coming up throughout the week in your assignments. And in case you forgot, I want to make sure you're back here so that you're answering it correctly. Now we're on Unit 3, Week 2, and we're going to read the story Finding Lincoln. So this is in our literature anthology book. This is our big book. Now I'm going to play the story for you to read.
Genre: historical fiction. Essential question: how can one person change the way you think? Read how a librarian opens doors for Lewis in Alabama in 1951. Finding Lincoln by Anne Malaspina. Paintings by Colin Bootman. On his way home from school, Lewis walked past the main library. The doors swung open, and Lewis could see an enormous room filled with books. Why, there must be 1,000,000 books in there, maybe more. Lewis wished he could go inside and count them for himself. The books reminded Lewis that he had to write an essay on President Lincoln. But the library was for white people only, just like the strawberry milkshakes at the drugstore lunch counter, the swings in the city park, and the best seats at the movie theater. It was 1951 in Alabama, and Lewis could play all his piano scales and roller skate backwards. Still, he couldn't borrow a book from the main library. "How about some lemonade?" asked Mama when Lewis got home. "I'm not thirsty." He sat down, kicking his foot against the table leg. "What's the matter?" Lewis didn't feel like talking. He was thinking that Daddy always had books piled high by his bed, but he had read those books again and again. Now Daddy wanted a book on honeybees so he could learn how to keep beehives. If Mama was ever going to have fresh honey, Daddy needed to get inside that library too. "Maybe a little homework will cheer you up," teased Mama, as she let the biscuit dough rise for supper. That morning, Mrs. Yates had told Lewis's class about the Civil War. The North and the South went to battle over many things, including slavery. The Southern farmers said they needed slaves to plant the tobacco and pick the cotton. President Lincoln wanted the slaves to be free. He dared to stand up for what he believed in, and that made a lot of people mad, said Mrs. Yates. Lewis raised his hand. Did President Lincoln shake things up when he was a boy? Mrs. Yates didn't know the answer. "Why don't you find out and write us an essay?" she said, giving him a book about Lincoln. But the book didn't say anything about young Abe. Now Lewis stared at his blank paper. "I need to find a book about President Lincoln when he was a boy," he told Mama. "I have an idea," Mama said. After the biscuits were baked, she took Lewis to the basement of their church. She and her friends had started a small library where people donated books they didn't want anymore. Lewis saw cookbooks, mysteries, and a book of maps, but no books about President Lincoln or honeybees. "One day soon we'll be checking books out of the main library. Just you wait," Mama said on the way back home. Lewis didn't want to wait anymore, and he wasn't going to. The next day after school, Lewis stopped in front of the main library. Holding his breath, he climbed the wide steps and pushed open the door. Everywhere he looked, books were shelved high. Lewis didn't have time to count, but 1,000,000 seemed about right. The library was also full of people. Every one of them turned to stare at Lewis. In the quiet room, Lewis's heart was beating as loud as a tin drum. He began walking to the front desk. He was so nervous that he bumped into a man's chair. Stop and check. Visualize. How does Lewis feel in the public library? Use the descriptions to visualize the events in the story. "Watch where you're going, boy," said the man. "Excuse me," mumbled Louis. On the polished floor, his sneakers squeaked like an old rusty hinge. Two librarians sat at the desk, looking at him. "Can't you read?" said one, pointing at the whites-only sign next to the door. Louis's face burned like it did when he ran fast on a hot day in August. The second librarian put down the book she was holding. "You'd better go home," she said, leading Louis back to the door. As she gently pushed him outside, she whispered, "Come back tomorrow, after 5." Louis didn't see how tomorrow would be any different. Still, Mrs. Yates was waiting for that essay. He had to go back. The next afternoon, Louis told Mama he needed to run an errand. Before she could ask a question, he was off. He ran all the way to the library and up the front steps. It was after 5 o'clock. The door wouldn't budge when he pushed it. Just as Louis turned to go, he heard a voice. "Shh! Come in quickly." The door cracked open, and the librarian from yesterday peeked out. Inside, the library was dark and quiet. "Now, what book did you want?" she asked. "I need a book about President Lincoln when he was a boy." "Follow me." Louis followed her down one stack of books, then another. She stopped, moving her finger along a high shelf. "Here it is." She pulled down a book. Her hand was shaking, like Louis's insides. She could get in big trouble for helping him. She might have to pay a fine or even lose her job. Louis read the cover. Abe Lincoln Grows Up by Carl Sandburg. She had found just the right book. Then Louis thought of something. Don't I need a library card? Even Daddy and Mama couldn't get a library card. Staring down at his sneakers, Louis wished he could disappear. The librarian was quiet for a moment. Then she tapped him on the shoulder. "Come on, I'll give you a temporary one. You do live in town, don't you?" Louis raised his head. "Yes, ma'am." The librarian didn't seem to mind shaking things up at all. Walking slowly down the street, Louis looked at the book and his library card, all the way home. Louis burst in the kitchen door. He couldn't wait to tell everybody. When she heard what had happened, Mama threw up her hands in amazement. Daddy shook his head like he had when Louis caught the catfish up at the lake last summer. "Isn't that something?" he kept saying. Mama put her arm around Louis. "I hope no one got in trouble." Daddy cleared his throat. "Mama and I just want you to be careful." Stop and check. Visualize. How do Louis's parents feel when Louis comes home with the library book? Use the descriptions to visualize how they act. That night, Louis and Daddy read about young Abe and his kindness to animals. Though he grew up in the wilderness, Abe didn't like to shoot game. When he saw his friends hurting a turtle, Abe refused to join in. He didn't care if he wasn't like the other boys. Abe also liked to have fun. Once he lifted a boy upside down so he could walk across the ceiling. Abe had to clean up the muddy footprints. Abe could swing an axe, drive a plow, and win a wrestling match with anyone he met. What he liked best was to read a book. Some people said he was lazy and thought too much. Abe was just in a hurry to learn everything he could. When Louis sat down to write his essay, he filled up 3 whole pages. President Lincoln did what he thought was right, even when it shook people up, Louis said at bedtime. Mama leaned to give him a hug. Just like you, Louis. Before Louis fell asleep, he remembered something. The next time he went to the main library, he needed to find a book about honeybees for Daddy. Out of 1,000,000 books, Louis was sure he could find the perfect one. Stop and check. Reread. Why does Louis's mother say, "Just like you, Louis," and give Louis a hug? Reread to find the answer.
All right, that takes us to the end of our first story. We're going to go ahead and jump into the next part, which is a biography. Now, a biography is a story about someone's life that was written by somebody else.
Genre: biography. Compare texts. Read about how one woman helped many African Americans to get an education. A great American teacher. In the past, some children in the United States could not get an education. Mary McLeod Bethune helped change that. Mary was born in 1875 in South Carolina. Her family lived in a tiny cabin on their cotton farm. Mary and her 16 brothers and sisters worked on the farm. Back then, few schools in South Carolina taught African American children. Mary's early life. One day, Emma Wilson came to the farm. She wanted to teach African American children. Mary was eager to learn. Although her parents needed her help on the farm, they let her go to school. Miss Wilson inspired Mary to learn, and soon she finished school. Mary wanted to continue going to school, but her family had no money. Then Mary Chrisman helped. She paid for Mary to go to college. It was not easy for Mary. Some people wanted to deny African Americans the chance to learn. Mary showed her bravery by standing up for her right to an education. After Mary finished college, she became a teacher. She dreamed of opening a school for African American girls. Mary McLeod Bethune. Everyone gets a chance. In 1904, many African Americans moved to Daytona Beach, Florida, to build a railroad. Mary decided to open a school for the railroad workers' children. Building a school was hard work. Mary rented an old cottage for the school. Her neighbors helped her fix it up. The first students were 5 girls and Mary's own son. The students used burnt wood for pencils and crushed berries for ink. Mary biked around town asking people to contribute to the school. More students came. They sold vegetables and gave concerts to raise money for the school. Changing lives. By the 1920s, Mary needed a bigger building for her school. She opened a larger school that joined with another school nearby. The school became Bethune-Cookman College. Mary grew up poor, but she helped many African Americans have more opportunities. Because of her, many African Americans received an education. She was a leader who was inspired to teach. Mary's story still inspires us. Mary's childhood home. Mary with her students in 1905. Make connections. How did Mary McLeod Bethune change the way people thought? Who else has changed people's lives?
All right, let's get into our reading and writing workshop book. And again, we're in Unit 3, Week 2. And this week focuses on leadership, and we're going to read a story called Jane's Discovery.
Genre: historical fiction. Jane's Discovery. Essential question: how can one person change the way you think? Read how a future president changed Jane's life. Jane slammed the door of the log cabin and raced toward the Indiana woods. Mother and father insisted that Jane go to school and learn to read. It was September of 1825, and Jane wanted to help on the farm like her brothers. Therefore, she told her parents no and refused to learn to read. Jane scooped up her long skirts and splashed through a small stream. Running helped her collect her thoughts, so she ran for what seemed like hours. She dashed around a tree and wasn't paying attention. As a result, she tripped over a pair of long legs stretched out in the grass. The legs belonged to her neighbor, Abe Lincoln. Abe was leaning against a tree reading a book. He smiled, stood up, and extended his arm to help Jane up. Jane recognized Abe and knew what a hard worker he was. But she also heard he was not like the other 16-year-old boys in Perry County. Abe was different because he spent all of his spare time reading books. "Why are you running so fast?" Abe asked. "Are you hurt?" Jane frowned. "No, I'm all right," she said. "I'm running because I'm upset. My parents want me to learn to read, and I told them no." Abe looked down at his book, and then at Jane. "Reading can change your life," he said quietly. "Meet me here tomorrow, and I'll prove to you how important reading is." Jane met Abe the next afternoon. He showed her a book about George Washington. One of his favorite teachers had donated it to him, and he had read it many times. Abe began to read aloud while Jane listened carefully. He read about Washington and what a great leader he was. He read about Washington's courage and bravery. "Someday I want to be as courageous as George Washington," said Abe proudly. "Someday I will be President of the United States, too." "I believe you will make a great president," said Jane. "Look at what a good leader you are now. You've completely changed my mind about reading." Abe smiled. "Tell your parents you will learn to read," he said. "Then meet me here every day after school. We will read together, and I will help you." At first, Jane was nervous and uncertain about learning to read, but she met Abe every day like clockwork. Fortunately, Jane's intense dislike for reading was only a temporary feeling. She was getting the hang of it. As a result, her nervousness began to disappear. One afternoon, Abe surprised her. To her amazement, he gave her his favorite book. "Thank you," she said. "Now that I can read, I don't ever want to stop." Years later, Jane opened her newspaper and read the good news. Her friend, Abe Lincoln, had been elected President of the United States. She smiled and thought about the day she tripped over his long legs. That was the day that changed her life. Perry County Tribune. Lincoln elected. Abe Lincoln elected 16th President. November 6, 1860. Illinois Senator Abraham Lincoln was elected 16th President of the United States of America. He defeated 3 other candidates in the November 1860 election. Make connections. How did Abe change Jane's life? Who has helped change the way you think?
All right, let's get into our comprehension strategy this week. Now, our strategy is to visualize, and visualize is just a fancy word for imagine. So when we visualize something, we're taking the words that the author is saying, the descriptions, the adjectives they're using, all of these colorful words that the author uses, and we use it to paint a picture in our head of what they're writing about.
Visualize. Use colorful words and details to help you visualize how characters feel. Picture in your mind what they do as you read. Find text evidence. How does Jane feel at the beginning of the story? Use the details on page 199 to help you visualize. Jane slammed the door of the log cabin and raced toward the Indiana woods. Mother and father insisted that Jane go to school and learn to read. It was September of 1825, and Jane wanted to help on the farm like her brothers. Therefore, she told her parents no and refused to learn to read. Jane scooped up her long skirts and splashed through a small stream. Running helped her collect her thoughts, so she ran for what seemed like hours. She dashed around a tree and wasn't paying attention. I read that Jane slammed the door and raced into the woods. She ran for a long time. From these details, I can figure out how Jane is feeling. She is upset and angry.
All right, and the last thing we're going to talk about is the next thing we're going to talk about is our cause and effect. So that's our comprehension skill. Now, when we're looking at cause and effect, we're looking at a thing that happened that made something else happen after it. So the cause is the first thing that happened. The effect is what happened as a result, what happened because of it.
Cause and effect. Events in a story's plot are made up of causes and effects. A cause is why something happens. An effect is what happens. Words and phrases such as because, so, and as a result often show a cause and its effect. Find text evidence. On page 199, I read that Jane is upset and angry. That's the effect. Now I need to find the cause. Mother and father want her to learn to read, and she refuses. That is the cause. A cause and its effect happen in sequence, or time order. Graphic organizer. Characters: Jane, Abe. Setting: the woods near Jane's house. Cause: Jane is upset because mother and father want her to learn to read. Effect: Jane refuses and runs through the woods to calm down.
All right, now our genre for this week, as you can see, since we're talking about a person who really lived, who was a part of our history, our genre this week is historical fiction. So that means we have a made-up story, but it has real people from history in it. So it either has a real person or real events that happened in history. And this fictional story revolves around, or it includes, those different elements that happen in real life. So if you guys take a look at a lot of the Magic Treehouse books are historical fiction books, right? Because they focus on an actual event in history, but the fictional characters, the made-up characters, travel back in time to those events, and they go on an adventure.
Historical fiction. Jane's discovery is historical fiction. Historical fiction is a story with made-up characters who take part in real events from history, has illustrations that show that the story takes place in the past. Find text evidence. I can tell that Jane's discovery is historical fiction. Jane is made up, but she meets and talks with Abraham Lincoln. The story is based on real events that could have happened a long time ago. In historical fiction, made-up characters might meet with real people from the past. The illustrations show details about how people dressed.
And the last thing we're going to review over here is idioms, and that's what we talked about at the beginning of our ELA notes section. So we're going to review them a little bit more here, and then that'll take us to the end.
Idioms. An idiom is a group of words that mean something different from the meaning of each word in it. The phrase, a piece of cake, is an idiom. It does not mean a bit of cake. It means something that's easy to do. Find text evidence. On page 199, the phrase collect her thoughts is an idiom. I can use clues in the story to help me figure out that it means to think about something. Running helped her collect her thoughts, so she ran for what seemed like hours.
All right, now that takes us to the end of our notes. Please make sure you rewatch this video as often as you need. revisit it as you're going through your assignments. And if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have an amazing day, third grade. Take care.